All right, today we're working on a 2019 RZR XP1000. If you get a 2016 or newer RZR or General, you probably have a secondary clutch like this that has the square rollers in it. And if you've ever heard the squealing that's been talked about all over the internet, you can share my frustration in trying to track that down. One of the fixes that people mention or talk about is changing out the square pucks to round rollers. And this is one of our old clutches. And you can see that we did that. We bought the hardened rollers, and it doesn't wear the aluminum housing as much as it did with the square. So that's a longevity fix. But the design of this clutch, what the theory is with it not being tied together in a small bearing diameter, it creates like a harmonic vibration, and that's what you hear. And then there's a secondary problem as well. If you ever have a clutch that clunks into gear when you push on the accelerator, it's just taking a minute for this clutch to compress, and when it does, you get a big clunk in your drivetrain. All right, so I'm going to start by unboxing this clutch that we purchased from Starting Line Products. I'll put their link in the description below. And this is a team-tied clutch, and what that means is both of the sheaths are tied together with a spring instead of being separate like the stock Boss setup on the 2016 and newer RZRs and Generals. So I'm going to go ahead and unbox this, and we'll see what's in the box. Whenever you buy these, typically you're going to have to buy a helix and a spring. If you call up Starting Line Products, they have them in stock. They'll kind of ask you some questions about what your use is, and then they'll set up the helix and spring that fits your need. All right, so I went ahead and pulled the secondary clutch out of the box, and that's what we're going to be focused on today, is making an upgrade to the secondary. And it should eliminate the clunking whenever you're changing from park to reverse or from park to drive, that bad lash sound whenever you try to move forward. So as we talked, this was a secondary that was the Boss system that we upgraded the rollers in. We went from the square pucks to the round, and then this is a team-tied secondary clutch. The physical difference, you can see the bearing diameter is different, the way the shaft mounts are is different. On this team tied, it's tied together on one solid shaft instead of being two separate pieces that go over the shaft. And then the spring is captured in there, and it keeps the sheaths stuck together, to where this, you hear all that noise. That's the harmonic vibration, and that's the clunking when you're changing gears. So on this, we had the spider insert and rollers changed out to heavy duty. This setup with a helix for the style riding that you want runs about $620 with the helix, the spring, and everything set up. So this is how it came from Starting Line Products. And this is a Venom. This is Venom makes the helix. If you look on the back, the helix is stamped with numbers, and that's basically the profile that the clutch opens. Okay, I want to cover a couple things about taking the belt cover off. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but one thing that you'll find out, especially on the RZR XP1000, the belt cover can be a pain in the neck to get off. You're going to need a 10mm and an 8mm to get the belt cover off. The 10mm to take the hose off, the vent hose off if you want to. I take it off, that way I don't have to fight with it. And then it's an 8mm that takes the hose clamps off, and then an 8mm to take the screws out of the belt cover. So when you go to take off the belt cover, don't jack the RZR up. If you jack it up, you have to take the shock off. If you leave it settled on the suspension, I've already taken the bolts out, taken the hose out of the way, and I'll show you how I get out. So basically you're gonna pull the clutch cover towards you, keep the bottom where the primary is, push down, and then rotate the clutch cover to get it out. I've had many days fighting with these things, and that's pretty much the best way that I've found to get it out. So right now we've got the Boss system secondary on this razor, a stock primary, and we're gonna pull off the secondary and change it out to the team tied with the Venom helix in it. And what you're gonna need for this is a 15 millimeter. I prefer to use the impact, makes it nice to get out of the way quickly. But you can do this a couple ways. You can take the belt off, which is going to require, you're also going to need a belt removal tool or a belt installation tool to put the belt back on. So you can take the belt off, or you can pull the primary or secondary off and the belt will come off with it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off. All right, so we got the bolt out. The secondary, the spring tension pushed out the sheath. Hopefully we can just pop it off. One thing to note, whenever you do this, make sure that your razor or your general's on a level surface, chock the wheels if you need to, and put it in gear. When you put it in gear, it holds the transmission output shaft in place to where you don't have to fight it so much to get the splines to line up. So we got lucky, it just popped right off. Pull it out here. And again, that's the stock Boss system that the rollers have been replaced on. Really saves the sheaths on that. And we're gonna put that out of the way. And we're gonna take the new team tied. As I talked about earlier, it's got a shaft that ties the sheaths together, the spring's compressed, and it's all locked together. So we're gonna go ahead and pull the belt out of the way. And when you pull your belt off, if you're gonna reuse it, just make sure you pay attention to the lettering on the belt and keep it the same direction that you had it when you took it off when you put it back on. A little trick that I like to do, I always like to make the letters to where I can read them from the outside, and that's how I remember which direction my belts go on. Okay. So we put it in gear so the transmission shaft doesn't move freely. We're gonna slide the team tied on, and when we rotate it, it's gonna fall into the splines, and just make sure that the output shaft of the transmission comes all the way out to the end of the secondary. Okay, so we got the secondary slipped over the transmission output shaft. The splines are locked in. As I talked about earlier, the bolt is the same, but the washer is different. So you have to put this washer on the team tied secondary. As you can see on the stock Boss one, the washer's built into the clutch, and that's what compressed it all together. To where on the team tied, it's open and you just see the splines. So this washer will take up that area and seat it correctly. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this bolt on. And I'm gonna hit it with an impact. I know some of you might not like that, but this is the way I do it. I'm gonna hit it with the impact, I'm gonna put the belt on, and then I'll go back and I'll torque the bolt afterwards. Just hit it to get it to seat on there to where we can test fit everything. At this point, we're gonna go ahead and put the razor back in park, and that'll allow us to move the secondary when we're putting our belt on. So when we do that, that allows the secondary to spin freely, and that's what we want when we put the belt back on. So again, we're gonna look at the lettering. The lettering is facing towards me. I'm gonna feed this over the primary clutch. And on the team tied secondary, it's a little bit more difficult to get the belt on because it has a lot more spring pressure on it than the stock clutch did. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna start the belt in the secondary clutch, try to get it fed up between the cover and going around, and then we're gonna take the little compression tool, the installation tool, and what this does is it goes in the clutch and then compresses the spring. And sometimes you gotta figure out where you can best get it. But that's gonna open up the clutch, compress the spring a little bit, and then you're just gonna have to work the belt around. Be careful, it will bite your fingers. So what I do is, I start at one direction, I move to the second one, keep pushing the belt down around, and then it pops on. So what we're gonna check right now is if the belt's centered, we're gonna spin it, make sure that the belt spins freely between the sheaths on the primary clutch. We're gonna check to make sure it's not deflecting any direction. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look underneath and make sure that it aligns the secondary and the primary. If not, then we may have to space or adjust. All right, everything looks good with the belt. I did put 2 washers behind the dishwasher to take up that space and make sure that the bolt tightened down and secured the clutch. The clutch came with 5 washers, and the washers just fit right inside the sheath, between the sheath and the transmission shaft, and took up some of the space. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna pick up the tools, move everything out of the way, and move the bike forwards and backwards and see if it takes the clunk out of it. All right, now for the moment of truth, let's see what happens when we start this thing up and try to pull it forward and backwards. Previously, we'd have a big clunk, and then at low speed, we had a howling from the clutch. And we could never get rid of that, whether we used the spacer from Hunter Works or different belts, different springs, different rollers, the howling was always there.